Hello and welcome to the Nintendo Archive. This is episode 4. I hope you're all doing well. It is the morning for me right now, which is a fun time to be recording a podcast. I meant to do this last night. That didn't happen, and I meant for this to be a short show. I don't think that's going to happen either, but we'll see. Before I get into what I've been playing, I think I want to start with a little bit of I don't know if it's not a rant. I'm not getting up on my soapbox. I am just, resting a foot on it, tying my shoe on that soapbox. The topic of it's not a rant, whatever the nice word for a rant is listener feedback, I guess, or responding to listener feedback and criticism, if you will. I was watching a video. It was pertaining to Link Between Worlds, and not getting too deep into how I feel about Link Between Worlds, I would say that it is, of course, it is heavily inspired by Link to the Past, and I will say this. For one, it's nothing like Link to the Past, though, and two, it's not as good as Link to the Past. So this led this fellow in the video. I can't really speak to the quality of it. I was sort of looking for my own biases to be confirmed, and they weren't, so that was how much attention I was paying to it otherwise. I mean, he said some correct things. He said some things I don't know if they're correct or not, but that's not what I'm talking about. When he brought up his previous video on Link to the Past, this is the thing that irked me more than anything else in the video, was he wasn't a big fan of it, which is fine. But the way he described the reaction to his video was uncharitable. Because he described the reaction as knee-jerk and angry and whatever. And maybe some of it was. Maybe the overwhelming majority of it was. And then he went on to the notion that it's silly for people to be upset about one's opinion. Oh, I'm sorry that it's just my opinion. And granted, that is true to an extent. But when it comes to this show, if you ever send me listener feedback that's critical, I'll try to give it a little more ground than that. I'll more easily make concessions, because I don't want to ever be someone who thinks that their opinion and everyone else's opinion have their own special little ivory towers that they dwell in. And if someone doesn't agree with it, it's all subjective anyway, and it's not going to change my opinion anyway because it's again in this ivory tower, and I feel this way, so therefore your disregard for my opinion is invalid. And granted, objectivity is a tricky thing, but the idea that your subjective opinion can't be objectively dumb in some ways that's wrong in my opinion. That's just wrong. You can make plenty of fallacious arguments or double standards, and if someone calls you out on that, you shouldn't chalk that up to, it's just a difference of opinion. What you have to say isn't worth crossing the street for or coming down from the tower. And I mean, he's a fairly popular YouTube, but so he can't respond to all criticisms equally, or he can't take the time of day to gloss over all the criticisms, good and bad. So I can give him some of the benefit of the doubt, but yeah, just the idea that opinions now, subjective opinions, are in ivory towers that can't be touched. And yeah, these ivory towers of relativity is a very an incredibly uninteresting answer to criticism. I think one of my main problems with why that response is uninteresting to me is because it kind of indicates to me that you aren't open to the idea that your opinion or initial reaction to something is juvenile, baseless, or wrong, even just wrong. And even if someone provides evidence against your notion of something, and that evidence is sound, and that yet that evidence still doesn't recontextualize your feeling of the game for good or ill, you should still, on an analytical level, accept that evidence as true, even if it doesn't manifest on a emotional or visceral level. And usually if you do that, guess what? It eventually will. It will follow through eventually. But the idea that you enjoyed something or didn't enjoy something is, even if you can't put it into words, wholly indicative, and the final say in terms of your own opinion is just silly to me. Because I generally regard my own opinion on things as kind of insufficient largely, or I make provision for that. So the idea that this YouTube video would simply pigeonhole the negative response to his opinion, which frankly I think was also like insufficient in a number of ways. It's just, I don't know, that I've either foolish or maybe even a little arrogant. And of course, I wouldn't say hypocrisy, but the irony of it is people who state that opinions are purely subjective then state those opinions authoritatively to ones who are of kindred spirit. Like, they don't do it explicitly. And so that's just a very two-sided, I don't know if I put that correctly, but okay, I think I have it. The idea that you feel vindicated for someone sharing your opinion and yet then pay no credence to opinion that won't validate it is effectively hypocrisy, and it is a show of, I don't know, even pride in some sense. Yeah, I think that really is the summation of what my little topic of the preamble of the show is. It's just, you can't respond positively to praise and just put the blinders on to criticism. That because your argument of subjectivity is just out the window then, because you are responding in a very real way to one feedback, showing that your idea of subjectivity is kind of faulty. Moreover, going from there, I don't think how you feel about a game isn't actually that important if you can't reason out why a game makes you feel that way. Even if there is a reason just beyond the edge of your comprehension, your opinion that something is enjoyable or unenjoyable isn't really worth much until you can either actualize that in an argument or express it in a way that will evoke empathy and understanding from someone else, at the very least, which I need to stop saying effectively so much, which, ultimately is what reasoning is. But yeah, the idea that, oh, well, I like something or didn't like something and your arguments didn't change my feelings on that, so therefore they're inane. I'm not even sure I'm that mad about it. Like, I'm not, maybe I am very mad about it, but just, it's kind of why I do this show, because I like to think I'm self-aware enough to avoid that. Even if only like 20 people listen to this ever, which is fine. Yeah, so that's what I had to say about that. I suppose we can move on to what I've been playing. What have I been playing? Still going on Mario Kart Double Dash, but there's really not much to say about that game that I haven't already said. I mean, there's plenty more to say, but I'm saving that for later. And I beat Donkey Kong 94. I think I probably liked the game more at the beginning than at the end, but even so, someone needs to explain this to me, because I can't figure it out. I can't comprehend it fully, but initially it feels more like a platformer, and then it becomes, later on, it splits itself down the middle between a platformer and a puzzle game. And I don't love puzzle games, which is why I kind of liked this one initially, because it felt more like natural and fast moving and organic in some way. Not that puzzle games can't feel organic, but I don't know. I think the word I would use is fiddly. They just get fiddly. And in this game, I think it avoids that for the most part. But towards the end, especially like I think World 7's just like, ugh. World 8's a little better, but still not as enjoyable. But other puzzle games, especially, even like I think Trine 2, the little I played of it, there's just an element of like dilly-dallying with this box you could conjure up in a way that sometimes it didn't fully do the thing you wanted to. I think there's even some pipes and whatever. I can't remember. There's some kind of telekinesis that you bandy with here and there, and it never felt good to do. It felt like you were either accomplishing the objective the wrong way or the right way was just more unrefined than you would have liked. Like between those two, it's like, oh, like, but you can't. It's a little blurred between which is what. Like, am I doing it the wrong way, or is this how it's supposed to go? And that's not. I suppose that can feel good in the sense if you like player agency, like, oh, you feel like you were the author of the game. But to me, that's not my favorite thing. And so in Donkey Kong 94, as it pertains to this, a lot of the solutions just feel bad. Like there's a level where, how did it go? There's one level with like a bunch of ladders, and turns out my issue with that level is I was just being too ambitious, where in this level, you have to activate a bunch of ladders to climb up and down in quick succession with this key, which you've obtained, which that is the general, if it's not a boss level, the way you beat the level is transport a key to a locked door, and then the level's over. So you have to, the key, if you're holding it, is perpetual. If you're not holding it, it will blink and eventually disappear. Same with the ladders, they are temporary, so you have to be juggling two temporary things, and you can throw the key. You can even brain enemies with the key, which is a nice little touch. I like that. Like, oh, seemed like a heavy object, so why wouldn't you be able to? To say you have to throw the key around while climbing up ladders and retrieving the key and then throwing again before the ladders disappear. I was being overambitious, and I don't know how to explain other than that, and I had a hard time with that level. There's other levels where you have to keep an eye on an enemy, and then I think there's another thing in puzzle games. You have to coax these icicle. I feel like I should know the actual word for what those are in real life since I live in Canada, but silly me. I think it might just be called icicles. In this level you have to, while watching out for a walrus, have to coax these icicles to above you to fall, and then you have to climb a ladder, and then before they disappear have to jump with the key, and you have only so much time. The game just feels, it gets to the part where it can feel towards the end, not so much the middle, where it can feel like you're not doing the right thing, or the margin of error to do the right thing is just so small that it's unenjoyable accomplishing it. You're like, oh, it wants me to do that, really? Like, there was a level where you can, if you get a hammer, like in the original Donkey Kong, you can't jump. But in this one, you can throw the hammer, and then you can jump. So, in this one particular level, again, this also was a bit of user error, so it kind of invalidates my complaint about it. But I mean, it's not that invalid, because this is the most reasonable avenue of travel, to my eyes anyway. So you have to grab the hammer to break blocks, but the blocks are above you, so you have to throw the hammer up towards the rope, climb the rope, jump off the rope to catch the hammer, and then throw it as you're in midair, while also making provision for the fall time and the time travel to climb up the rope to catch the hammer again and be moving all while you're holding up on the D-pad, then pressing left as the hammer hits your hand to catch the hammer, then holding left to land on the platform, and doing this all relatively perfectly, and then throwing it up, going towards the ladder and throwing it up towards the ladder, climbing the ladder, catching it as you get to the top. And usually the rope thing took so long that the hammer power ran out. And I'm like, oh, great. So you just, those kind of things, I hope I explained that well. I mean, it's actually kind of enjoyable sometimes when you pull off these otherwise improbable things and how they can mix together. But other times it feels unreasonable that they would ask me to climb the rope and whatever. It turns out there's this block you can land on. And so you don't have to throw the hammer a dozen times. You have to throw it once. But that block was, at the time, it didn't seem apparent that block was accessible to you, because that block is placed underneath the girder. You think it's just window dressing, but like directly underneath, like it's holding up the girder. Things like that made the experience a little less than ideal, but I would say the game's a really good Game Boy game and quite substantial. It's about 10 hours long, which is considerably longer than Kirby and Dreamland, or Kirby's Dreamland, whatever it's called, and Castlevania The Adventure. So those are about, I did those in 3 hours, three and a half. I mean, Kirby I did in 30 minutes technically. So this game feels much more substantial. I think there must have been, if not 100, just not 100, but just shy of 100 levels. And they're kind of short, but I would say the final world's really good, because all of those levels are Donkey Kong boss levels. I think that's what you call them. And in general, I'd say the best levels in this game throughout are the ones where you are going up against Donkey Kong, where he's throwing barrels and stuff at you, because I don't know what it is. I think probably goes back to my feelings about the fiddliness of the game otherwise, but there's a clear objective in those levels, and it might just be seeing Donkey Kong makes it more of a pointed experience. It might be just as basic as that, but yeah, so every fourth level you'll have a Donkey in the game. Every 4 levels you get a Donkey Kong level, and those are almost without exception, I can think of, the best levels in the game, and I really like that. And that actually, funnily enough, vindicates the original arcade game to me, in a sense, because I probably put 3 hours in that game in 5-minute increments. I don't even know any of the names of the people who go for high scores in Donkey Kong, but I just play. I don't know how many levels are in the arcade. I know on the NES, I think it might just be 3, but just running those 3 levels 5 minutes at a time to beat it for, a total 3 hours shows just, one, how enjoyable those are, just for some reason, and 2, in this game, the fact that those levels remain the best shows just how great the base design template of Donkey Kong is. So all around, a good, I think maybe the last outing of that series, like the Donkey Kong initial series, and a very strong one. All around really enjoyable, despite my uncertainty on the puzzle aspects of the game. It's a really good game. Had a fun time with it. Probably a GameCube classic for sure. And really, really enjoyable. I also, aside from that, I was playing Everything or Nothing, the co-op, with my 6 and 7-year-old nephews, because I don't have anyone else to play with, and that makes it a little more difficult to, just in general, makes it a little more difficult. But as I remembered the co-op in 007, Everything or Nothing is really solid. Don't know if it's great. I know it's kind of hard, and that's makes it engaging, for one thing. I don't know how far I'll get in it. You share a pool of lives with your buddy, and since the nephews have actually been doing pretty good at not getting outright murdered, but they don't neutralize enemies as good as they'd need to, so I end up dying too, and we just run out of lives, have to start a grouping of levels from scratch, which is how it's structured. It's fun though. works really well, and since the game isn't really about shooting mechanics so much as it is threat management and it's about threat management and not getting shot as opposed to shooting someone else. And so having a co-op partner is conducive to making that goal more enjoyable. But I really have nothing more to say on it, other than I don't think it would change my overall opinion of the game. It's still a pretty good game otherwise. And that's all I've been playing thus far. So we get to move on to our review phase of the show. So when we come back after this music break, we'll head into that. Welcome back. Before I move on to the review, I'd just like to add to my little preamble from earlier, make it a little more concise point, if I will. The idea of a world full of people whose own viewpoint is sacred because it's just there, because it's theirs, and therefore it's special. You see how that's like a bad thing, right? Like not a very good thing at all. So that's what I wanted to add. So the game I've decided to review for today's show is, I guess, a little fitting for my preamble, because it's a game that I initially, and still to an extent, don't particularly love that much or even enjoy. But regardless of that, the game has a lot of great qualities. And this game is WarioLand Shake It. Released in... It was released in July 2008 for the Wii. Maybe that was a Japanese release, I'm not certain. Developed by Goodfeel, known for Yoshi's Woolly World and Epic Yarn and Yoshi's Crafted World, and I'm sure there's other things they've done, but I can't think of them, or I'm not privy to them. I think I hadn't played this game till last year, probably in the summer, maybe. No, in the fall even. And now it's like 6 months later, and I had forgotten a lot of things about it. And so my initial notion was to do a review on it, on my memory of 6 months ago, but that, after watching some reviews to glean some information, I found those reviews to be cursory and bad, and making assertions that just aren't true, for one. So I figured I better not do that myself, and revisited the game, just a cursory flyby to reacquaint myself with it. And as I said, I wouldn't say I'm terribly fond of the game in the way that other people are, but since this little reintroduction to it just for this show, which is why I didn't get the show done last night, the game's qualities stood out stronger than they did on my initial playthrough. WarioLand Shake It is a 2D platformer with a heavy emphasis on loot, exploration, and treasure. Not exploration to the extent of a Metroid game. For a linear level-based game, there's more exploration than, say, Donkey Kong, Kirby, or Mario. And somewhere along the lines of Yoshi, really, which is fitting since they did a Yoshi game after this. You obviously control Wario, and I will come out with it. I am not privy to the previous WarioLand games, so I can't speak to how this game compares to them with any real authority outside of a few tidbits here and there that I know of. I know there's some shared commonality, yet I'm not going to be able to definitely speak to that. So this will be very standalone. However, going forward with the show, I will be playing those sooner or later. Probably sooner. So I'll just be reviewing the series backwards, which is fun, an interesting way to do it. The manner in which Wario controls is I don't want to call it simple, but you have a jump and a shoulder charge, a shoulder melee charge that you can kind of combine, and that's your basic moveset. You also have a crawl that you can then belly flop jump out of, and even do a belly flop bop from that jump to get into down smaller pathways you couldn't get through jumping upright. And you have some other moves too. You can grab enemies and use them as projectiles, and you have a butt stomp that has a few characteristics to it, and you also have I don't know what you call it, but I call it a slam, where you slam your fist on the ground, which makes teetering objects plummet, and enemies on the roof fall to the floor, and makes bombs explode. It has a number of things to it, and it's fairly useful. They get more use out of it than I would imagine they would. But I mean, aside from that, I think that's really his moveset. There are, I would say overall, Wario's moveset isn't as comprehensive as Mario's, and isn't as viscerally enjoyable as Donkey Kong's. So the game controls fairly tightly. I think there are times where I run off into spikes when I meant to jump, but that might be user error on my part. It's hard to say. The game's speed, since it is a good feel game, I was concerned that I might be kind of slow, and you might be a tad slower than Mario, but the tempo of the movement's good enough. The levels, as I said, they have quite a bit of verticality to them in addition to their width, because there are a number of nooks and crannies and ledges, other hard to reach, that you are expected to find and reach with a little bit of exploration and or expert platforming. The fact of the matter that this is the case does make the game feel just, I would say, slower than Mario and Donkey Kong, even if his movement speed isn't slow in and of itself. I think to me that's a bit of a bother, but I can't necessarily say it's a bad thing at the moment. However, Wario, and I think this is true with at least one of them, if not all of them, Wario kind of has a conceit in his level design where you move forward through the level, and then once you reach the tail end of that level, you then move all the way back and finish the level at the start of it. And going back to the beginning is where the game does a good job of employing speed through these, just how the level is designed for one, and also the use of these. They're effectively a Wario launcher that gives him almost like a Sonic Rush quality to him, and the object is to maintain that speed. If you faceplant into a wall, you'll lose it, and if you jump on a rope, you'll lose it. If you hit an enemy that isn't easily bulldozed over, you'll lose it. It does have other qualities that make it ideal to maintain, such as you can run on water. You can hit the duck button while you're going full speed, and you'll do a slide that will break smaller blocks and let you scoot under low-hanging obstacles, and that's always fun to pull off. Really, you're having your most optimal fun when you're maintaining that boost from the launcher, and every level kind of follows this structure. Sort of a slower trek through, and then a speedy exodus. And I think that works well. I think that's probably the most enjoyable part of the game, apart like the second part particularly. And it is a nice feat in level design that they have to make the level double laned, or not double laned, but double tiered in that way. So props to them for doing that. And props to the people who initially designed WarioLand with this dichotomy. There are a few diversions from this main level structuring, but only a few, couple vehicle levels and some boss fights that are kind of a highlight. I'll have to get into them, but this is generally the structure of the levels in each world, in the 5 worlds, and it won't deviate from that. And I like the second part more than the first, because I find the first to fall under a category of my own making. The category is a plodformer. Any platformer that lacks speed and lacks difficulty or harrowing obstacles, I usually put under this category of plodformer, because they're just kind of easy, slow, and I don't know, there's just not a lot of grit to them generally. The Kirby games are this for the most part. Kirby also has the out that it's somewhat of a beat 'em up too occasionally, so it can get away with it. Yoshi Woolly's World especially falls under this category heavily, where it's just it's just a lack of traction in general that I really don't love about that. And so that's my go-to plodformer. It doesn't move fast and it doesn't engage the player on like a gameplay level. This game's manner in which it will engage you is through exploration and also a general pleasing audio-visual experience too. Let's not forget that, and I'll be moving into that later. And like other platformers, is generally easy, therefore, so they're not looking to have a very punishing experience. And not that this game is easy inherently, like it starts easy, but then it has its own sort of difficulty to it. But you have 10 hearts or something that you lose half of it one at a time. So you have it's really hard to die. But the way they introduce difficulty is usually, and this is one of my issues with plodformers, as I call them, and this game as part of those, is that their manner of penalty is tedium more than death. And if in a Mega Man game, there's an amount of tedium when you die and have to replay certain parts of the level, but since each part of the level can be moved through relatively quickly once you have it down, but also maintains a difficulty within that fast moving level. There's a tension in the game. This one, since you can't have that tension because it's more going for exploration, and so having yourself be murdered abruptly wouldn't vibe with that. They penalize you through having to redo something you failed to do the first time, and until you get it down to get the harder treasures, and so that's where the harder platforming comes in. They also have what's effectively an achievement system that provides additional traction if you're interested in that, and I'll be talking about that later too. Things like stomp 6 of these enemies, beat the level in record time, in addition to having 3 treasures that you need to find, killing a gold enemy, collecting this much money, and other more arbitrary ones like don't fall in water and don't get hit by this enemy, things like that. And they have like a grocery list worth of that. From the get-go, you don't have to beat the level once to see it. So if you're a completionist, I suppose that's very thoughtful. That's the word, thoughtful. So yeah, all of that will generally be incorporated into the first part of the level. And then the second part, some of the achievements and some of the treasures will be accessible via the second, but in a much hastier manner where they're kind of placed in front of you more than anything. And it's a matter of pulling off reactionary feats rather than thoughtful or elongated platforming sequences or keen eyes. Moving on to, let's say, the structure of the game. The game is broken up into 5 worlds, with the final boss being on its own little world. Each world has a differing amount of length. I don't know if there's more than 20, probably just shy of 30 levels in the game throughout that are per each island. And initially, I think this game has been said to be rather short. I don't think it's that short, really. I think it's on the shorter side, but it's substantial enough, even if you're not going for those achievements. And so, yeah, each of the worlds is split into an island, and the island has a nice, beautiful little hand-drawn artwork to it. And the island has a old, aged map kind of aesthetic to it, too, because it looks like a treasure map, kind of, the island map screen, and that looks really nice. And the game is good looking overall because it's hand drawn throughout and gives it, again, a strong audio visual component. And yeah, this map screen is just one aspect of it. The levels, of course, that can then be accessed in a linear fashion on this island map screen. And then after you've done all the levels, you get a boss, and these are a real highlight to the game. In general, like, I had a hard time remembering this game from 6 months back, but I did not forget the bosses. Like, I could remember all of them. But yeah, highlight of the game, the second boss fight is a pursuit style boss fight where you chase him down in a racing car that has a boxing glove attachment to wail on him when you close the distance, and all the while he is throwing whatever he has at you behind him to deter you and kill you. So it's a really engaging boss fight, really striking looking too. I think his name's Roderick or whatever, but that's a great boss fight. The third boss fight, I think, might be my second favorite, in that it's one of those boss fights where you can be sticking them with jabs as you're dodging theirs blows. So, it's a fast paced, and if you're really good at it, you can have it done within a hurry through, the exercise of skill. Unlike boss fights where you have to wait for them to drop some kind of enemy or object that you use against them, or they get themselves stuck after they miss you, and then you have an opening to wail on them, that kind of thing. So the third boss is really good. It's this kind of clown, some kind of clown face or whatever. I can't really think of it. And there are these, I don't know what you call them, but these ropes that you can spin Wario on, and as he spins, he actually has a damage potential as he comes down from the spin and can wail on the boss coming down, and then you have to ensure that you catch the rope again to get going again and repeat it. So it's very enjoyable in the manner in which you fight him. Is just a bop him on the head affair. So very good too. The fourth boss fight, really hard, but I think memorably so. It's unlike the third, in which you only have a selection of openings. But, there's some enjoyment in the amount of stuff you have to definitely withstand before you get to those openings. So it's not my favorite, but it's really good. And the final boss before the final boss is really good too. People said he has a Cuphead kind of look to him, and that is the first thing I noticed too. The entire game can remind me of Cuphead a little bit, but this boss particularly, the manner in which you defeat him is by utilizing the throw mechanic, much like that would then be seen in Yoshi's Woolly World if you knew that it was there. Like I didn't, so I was just using the traditional moving cursor from Yoshi's Island, which is a shame. This throwing, it's much more natural, where you just use the gyrometer on the Wii remote to get the trajectory right, and then you just release. So, and there's other stuff besides, but it's a pretty good boss fight because they ramp up the difficulty to the point where you're juggling so many different considerations. Despite the game being otherwise easy throughout, these boss fights in general provide a little bit of grit, a little bit of tension that's very welcome in this game. So to say it's outright easy is somewhat incorrect on account of these boss fights especially. I'll move into some more of my general thoughts now that I've described the game in as much detail as I figure it needs to be described. And I do have a number of issues with this game, some legitimate, some not. For instance, it is a good feel game, and I don't love good feel as a developer. I've only played Yoshi's Woolly World and a bit of Kirby's Epic Yarn too. So Kirby's Epic Yarn I had quit. I don't know if I mentioned that in a previous episode, because it didn't have a death. Like you couldn't die in Kirby's Epic Yarn, and even though I was new to platforming, I still thought that was a silly kind of thing, that there was no penalty in the game. So I actually stopped playing it, which is probably was a mistake. It's an otherwise good game, is my understanding, and maybe I'll get around to it one day. But I don't have that copy anymore. In Yoshi's Woolly World, I didn't like it because I just thought it was kind of slow and boring. And the only real engagement I got out of was when I was trying to get all the yarns and all the flowers, but I think I was in the second or third world, and I was 30 hours into the game already, which was just absurd, and I didn't want to spend that amount of time in Yoshi's Woolly World. I was having fun, but not that much fun. So I had a bit of a skepticism towards this game coming in, and it does feel, again, like Yoshi's Woolly World in a sense, where it just kind of moves slower than my preferences. And I think most people, when it comes to platforming, their starting point is usually Mario 3 or World, or if not the original Super Mario World, but I think it's Mario 3 and Mario World. My starting point's a little funnier, because I always thought platformers I was a little off put by them, because the fact that you could fall in a pit and just outright die sounded extreme to me, even though I said that the fact that you couldn't do that in Kirby's Epic Yarn deterred me from it. But even so, the fact that the penalty was so absolute was off-putting, and so I didn't play platformers for a long time. 3D, 2D, didn't really, outside of some Kirby Superstar particularly. But that's not really a platformer, so didn't play them. However, much later, I played, during the Wii U days, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. In that game, it's funny that I thought platformers were unforgiving and afraid of them. That's the one that got me into them as a genre. And that's a one-of-a-kind game to get into a genre to as well. Excellent game, but very hard, and I don't think I've ever had a certain just sort of pure fun with a game on a visceral level. So that's sort of because that was my first platformer. That's sort of the speed I would like to platformers to go at. I figure even like Super Mario Galaxy, I thought was like a little like, okay, this is kind of moving slower than I want it to. Can this ramp up a little? So this game is certainly not going at the speed of Tropical Freeze. And that, for one thing, annoyed me. I didn't figure it would. It being a good feel game. So I made provision for that, but still wasn't having that much fun with it from the get-go. Especially the first world. It's kind of easy. Another thing that I really didn't enjoy about this game from the get-go is when it comes to games, how do I put it? I don't think I actually like them very much often. That's exactly how I would put it. I think the average game that's highly reviewed is more than likely boring and overrated. Not that I love the term overrated, just how about not good? I don't think they're very good. So when I start a new game, I want the game to respect my time and be over with in a hasty manner. I know, kind of, why do I even play games? It's a great question, but that's my general feeling. And that's just kind of led me to think, to have this preference for games that don't waste my time or don't, moreover, not even waste my time, they don't posture the idea that they're really long in a positive way. I'm like, because more than likely they won't be that good and they'll overstay their welcome, and I hate, I think even I had this bit of an issue with indie games, and that not all of them, but some indie games, it's like, just regardless of how long they are, I would just feel like, the idea you've presented in this game is about good for 2 3D Mario levels. Because Nintendo 3D Mario games, they can introduce a very exciting idea and be done with it within that time frame. So for a game to say, I'm going to be getting 10 hours out of this, it's just still. So, yeah, I'm very wary of games that will take a long time, regardless of how inspired that time spent will be. And I want a developer to generally respect my time and not try to razzle-dazzle me with second-rate nonsense. And this is why I don't like open-world games almost entirely, because they're just copy-paste whatever. A copy-paste mentality of this and that, and icon vomit, like, let's engage your OCD and make you feel compelled to do it all. And I'm the exact opposite. If I'm not going to do it all, I might as well not do any of it. So that's my reasoning, and I won't do any of it. So you can maybe see where I'm going, where when this game on its face wears its giant achievement list, I'm immediately repulsed by it. And it's a generally deflating feeling when you see something in a game and immediately say, well, I'm not going to be engaging with that. And it's deflating because already the game has an aspect that you don't want to engage in. And two, that aspect, you're uncertain of how integrated it will be into the rest of the game. I mean, technically, the more integration, the better. But, if it's something you outright don't want to do, like, don't hit the water, kill these 10 enemies, find this golden enemy, collect the 3 treasures, beat it in this time. It's just a problem. I look at that and it seems very insurmountable, or not insurmountable, time consuming in a way that I can't see myself engaging in. And it just shows me the elegance of the Kong letters in Donkey Kong Country. They're always in plain sight. There's only 4 of them. And getting them isn't a matter of scrounging through the level. It's a matter of expert platforming, which adds, again, to the already present tension. And so it feels conducive to what the game's going for as it is, and not like this bolted on thing. And even now, if you're a completionist, I guess that's cool that they do that, but I don't really. When it comes to achievements and completionism, girls aren't going to be impressed by video games anyway, so calling it an achievement's kind of lame already. It's like, I know, what a outdated viewpoint on video games, but I just make provision for the fact that a lot of people feel that way, and generally speaking, video games as a thing aren't an accomplishment in general, unless you're like, I don't know, MLG, but even then, it's not NFL by any means. So calling something an achievement, and expecting people to feel a sense of pride and dignity from wasting their time on this little checklist is just like, ugh, not interesting. And so that was the amount of time I'm talking about, you can tell it's just a huge turnoff. It was probably the main component of my dislike for the game. And Good Feel has done this before. I don't know about Yoshi's Crafted World, but I think they did. And I just hate it. Like, it's not necessarily bad. I'm not going to say it's like terrible, but it's not either you're not going to engage with it, or you're going to engage with it because you have OCD traits, and that's like, now you're wasting people's time because they have compulsion issues, which is even then, like, as I say, it's a little scuzzy. So I would say that component's not very useful, and even the general pace of the game is, I probably reiterated it twice, an issue to me. And I don't think the moveset's that interesting in this game either to add to it. I was not, when I played this game, that entranced by it. And even now, my enjoyment of it is not as high as I was led to believe it would be, or as high as people expect it to be. That being said, all the negatives to springboard off of, whatever problem I had with this game, it seemed to give me an answer constantly throughout its duration, like something positive to respond with. And that's very admirable that the game was able to do that. And the game did it in a number of ways, where it would introduce different sort of level assets that would spruce up the level. It did it through its audio-visual design, which is generally strong throughout. I'm not, get back into being a snippy little negative boy, I don't consider hand-drawn art to just be sort of a shoe-in for awesome-looking art. So there are hand-drawn levels in this that are, frankly, they might as well have not been, because it's just an ugly level regardless, such as whatever the river level's called, Soggy something river, where it's just raining and mucky looking. It's like, well, you can hand draw this all you want. It's not going to look good unless you go for some sort of some kind of a deviation from that. But otherwise, a lot of they do employ the hand-drawn art style really well, and it looks good, and the music is great. I'll probably have to pull up some music on my phone to show in detail that it's quite featured and has a broad range of genres. And I didn't love the music particularly, which is another thing of why I'm not as high in this game, but I can't deny that it's really strong component. It's a great musical outing. That can't be refuted. In terms of the levels, they do a lot with the aesthetics generally. I mean, it is desert, ice, desert, ice, fire, water sort of tropes here and there, but then they have other less frequently seen ideas, such as, a nice haunted mansion and a train, a westerny train, a circus sort of style, casino one, which again, I don't think none of these sound that super unique, but they're a nice change of pace and they look really good and they do really pop with this art style. And as with the art style that keeps the variety up, they introduce sort of level assets that also keep the pace going, such as the little, I really need to figure out what they're called. The word where I was thinking of was trapeze. Trapeze. Yeah. Swinging from trapezes or ropes or being shrunk in this little machine that makes for a tiny Wario that then, if he goes back the other way, he'll become large again, all to your discretion. They introduce a lot of one-off little ideas. Floating logs down a river or ropes that when you swing on them, they start to fall on a vertical track, and so you have to be careful with the timing. And then other things too. There's a little flying air pod in the airy tail, something level that's fun to use and uses the motion controls in a subtle and enjoyable manner. And then there's other things still, such as this in the train level. There's these floors that are kind of they look like a bellows spring or like an accordion that you can spring off of, and they introduce in that level 2 balls that you can throw to activate switches, and I imagine there's a bunch of other things too. That in addition with the boss fights and some of the vehicle levels, which are kind of enjoyable. They keep things fresh in a game that I otherwise wouldn't like. I'm kind of forced to be impressed by seeing them. And then there's other things. It's probably an old Wario power-up where there's this flame it's like a power, but I don't think Wario much likes being on fire. He doesn't seem to be having a good time, but you catch yourself on fire, and then you have to run around and maintain it until you become just a ball of flame that can then extinguish this little block that's in your way. But you have to, maintain it and be in the right position in order to do that. And the other times where you can become a rolling snowball if you, I think it's literally just having a snowball drop on you and then you roll down a hill to build up the momentum to break bricks. And then there's also the Wario launcher, which I mentioned before. Just a lot of little level assets that keep everything fresh and enjoyable. I will say that I don't know if this is a bad thing. I mean, maybe this is how most platformers are, but it seems to be the amount of fun you have in a level is entirely incumbent on the level designer more so than the player, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, as I said, and that's probably like the majority of platformers. But in a game like Donkey Kong 94, I found I was able to have fun just with the expanded moveset present there. That was, again, also made by the game designer too. But it just feels like the authorship is more on them than on you ever. Like you're not ever given the tools to have a really great time with the shoulder charge and the jump outside of specific challenges they've set up for you with these, again, very impressive level assets that are enjoyable and keep things fresh. So I will say that. Again, I can't really say it's much of a complaint. I figure I should mention it. There is one thing that I would say it's a positive, even though it annoys me, that the game, the way it works is that the worlds are split up into 5 worlds, of course, but you can only access the next world with money, which, again, the game's about looking for treasure. And it was my initial notion that the money was just for, unlocking certain little doodads here and there, extras. So the fact that it The fact that it then becomes a part of the critical path was a bit bewildering, and I didn't like that at first. I thought it was very contrived and gating. But as much as that is true, I think I appreciated them doing that because it did force me to engage with the level more, which I had a problem doing on account of the big checklist. I just sort of like, oh, I'm just going to straight shot it because, again, why, outside of engaging with puzzles that just looked intrinsically enjoyable, why would I do anything that was annoying just for this checklist? And in introducing this money gate did provide necessity for doing it, which then provided engagement. And people talk about engagement as kind of a how much fun you're having, but I think engagement is probably biomechanical too, like where you have to become engaged with something because it's because it requires more of your attention than you otherwise would give at a glance. And so I think that's all there is to it, really, to that thought. It's just making me have to generate income in these levels made me the player explore them, and ultimately made them more enjoyable, as opposed to if exploring them was entirely optional. And I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but I think it was ultimately a good thing that they decided to put a money requirement on each island, despite how contrived it is. And I don't think in a modern game would actually do that nowadays outside of a cell phone game and with real money. And I suppose the only thing left to talk about really is the music. I mean, the story is something really to talk about. They have nice cutscenes in them, and the final boss is really good, as I've stated. But story's a Nintendo story. It's not. The only worthwhile thing to mention is that there are creatures called Murfles, which I think is fun to say. So, story is ultimately positive. And outside of that, again, I think people complain about or cite the length as being not what it should be, but I don't really. It might be slightly short for a platformer, but it's reasonably long, and there are probably as many as 10 secret levels, which are, I don't know, that's a third more of the game, if not more, to unlock, with secret maps that you can find in other levels. So there's enough content as it is without delving into any of the achievements to pad the game out, which is also why I'm annoyed why they're there, even if they're, ostensibly harmless, and it's only me who finds them annoying. So yeah, the game length is fine, the content is varied, and the platforming, despite the player moveset being kind of in and of itself, is augmented by, what would I call them? It's augmented by level gimmicks and fun little power-ups that spruce up the general gameplay, and by also the exploration, which you will engage with one way or the other. So, it's a fun game with a goal in mind through the collecting of gold. So, I think that might be all my thoughts. Again, I'm not in love with the general platforming type that this game falls under, but it does it very well all the same, and the bosses are really good, and the presentation is really good throughout the menus, cutscenes. I think the enemies they have nice expressions, but I think they're kind of lame, and that they're mostly just objects and two-footed, no-armed, little blobby creatures with extensions on them that will hurt you, like a fork or a drill, but not. I don't think it's that good. The bosses are fair much better, but in terms of presentation, I'd say the enemies are. I don't know. I think a Koopa is a much more creative creature or a charging chuck than any of the enemies in this game. But I will, with my handy phone in here, I will make show you some examples of the music, because I think the music is, well, there's really no complaint I have about it. It's not to my taste ultimately, but it's really good, and it's very varied in its genres, and apparently every level has 2 tracks. There are some of the secret levels did have repeat tracks, which I thought was disappointing. The Olympian style levels seem to share a music track, which kind of annoyed me, because otherwise all the music's unique, and each level actually has a second track for the second phase of the game when you're hauling it back to the start of the level. And I'm going to look for a few good ones here. Again, not all of them are to my taste, but that's irrelevant to their quality. They seem to have a strong melody, and they start the melody off kind of with weaker, and then the chorus comes in, or the crescendo, not a musical major, that really beefs up that tune, and other times the initial melodies an accompaniment to a more interesting chorus that you wouldn't have expected off the get-go. So it's all very solid stuff, at least like has more than one thing going on in the song. And then I'm sure so this first song, it's more one that I think the game can sound a little Seinfeldy sometimes, and I don't love that, like sort of jazzy, and other times someone said it's like Motown. I'm like, I could understand there's a Motown vibe, and then sometimes there's organ in it too. So good instrumentation, a lot of different styles, and this first song is not, I don't love it, but it's a reasonable, I think it's a strong example of what the music in the game is. Yeah, can't keep it all going for too long. A good thing going there. And here's another one, kind of, again, I don't know if it counts as funk or Seinfeld, I don't know, some kind of 80s funk. I don't know what the genre of music be. Not my thing, but it's got strong instrumentation. This is Gurgle Gulch, which I just did today, so. And I'll move on to, well, oh, okay. My ears are ringing. But those are, I feel like, standard fare for the game. I don't love them, but I'm going to go to one of my favorites. This is from World 1. I think it was the first song I actually kind of landed with me, from Whoopsie Desert. And I just like it a lot. And I like that little thing there, but I'm going to move it on to the part I really enjoy. I'm going to move it forward to a part that I really makes the song great. Right here. So yeah, very deserty, and it starts with the I don't know what you call that initial instrument, but and then moves on to the electric guitar. You know, it makes that melody stronger. Just great stuff. But that's not my favorite track. I'm gonna end it with the track I really like, which is more towards my taste. It's not like David Wise, but it reminds me of him and why I like that kind of music that's moody and not necessarily melancholy, but ambient and atmospheric. So that's the song from It's All Mine, which is a mine level. Yeah, It's All Mine. Again, got some organ there. I assume it's real good stuff. Oh, I don't know how all this will come through my editing. I think it clipped my audio a bit, but yeah, all the same. That's a great song. I love the organ at the beginning. I like the bass and some of the drums making a cavernous vibe within the music that, you know, in a mine is very appropriate. And then that, I don't know what kind of distortion you'd call that guitar, but it's real good. I like that song a lot. Probably my favorite song. Level was pretty good too. I don't remember it fully other than that. It looked really good. A lot of glam and glitter to it. So the point is the music is maybe it's kind of unassailable in its quality. Really good stuff. Really great stuff. With that out of the way, that's all I have to say on the game. I don't really have any stray thoughts other than, despite I guess much like my start, what I was saying at the beginning of this episode, just because a game doesn't necessarily land with you initially, or you can have things you don't like about it, doesn't mean that that's the be all and end all of your opinion of it. Like, it can change and you can just be flat out wrong. And I think even prior to revisiting this game for the podcast, just briefly, I knew it was of a high quality to the extent I couldn't specify, but revisiting it, it's a very solid game. Good platformer, great looking, great music. So in terms of a number score, I would still say that the base component of the game, the initial platforming at the start of the level, is kind of lackluster, but even so, it's spruced up by strong and varied level design and level assets, so it's not much of a deterrence. And the second phase of the level is usually pretty great, and the bosses are great. The length is fine, music is great, presentation's wonderful. So yeah, it's almost sounding like an 8 out of 10, frankly. But I think I'm going to 7.5. Like, it's a really good game. Like, a really good game, sure. But I don't know if it's truly great on account of the slow pace and the generally uninteresting character movement. Of course, there are exceptions to that. Such as I really enjoy his belly flop and his crawl, and his animations are good. But the charge really doesn't do it for me, and the level can be slow. So I think that would withhold it back from being truly great. I mean, honestly, it's again, 7.5 is means it's no slouch either. It's a really good game, and I've definitely saw that came out in my revisiting of it. So that is the review score. It is given 7.5, and now the last thing to do is to see where it fits with the other two games, GoldenEye and Punch-Out. GoldenEye and Punch-Out. I might think that the base action in GoldenEye is better than Wario with the stealth and the shooting. And both games use the Wii hardware I would say GoldenEye uses it more so than WarioWare, but WarioWare does a good job of making subtle use of it to the game's benefit. Forgot to mention the fact that you shake the Wii remote to shake the gold out of a bag, which is very gimmicky, but entirely appropriate. So you could probably throw that as in its favor, very appropriate use of the Wii technology. Whereas GoldenEye sometimes use some waggle gestures, which are fine, harmless, but not as good. But it doesn't deter it. Overall, though, I'd say that the presentation of WarioWare is much stronger. The music is better, and the variety in the levels keeps everything interesting. And the boss fights are, GoldenEye doesn't have boss fights, really. I would all say that makes WarioWare better than GoldenEye, for sure. And Punch-Out, I mean, just going off the number score, I place Punch-Out higher. Punch-Out's fairly unassailable on a gameplay front, where WarioWare is varied but sometimes slow. And as I stated before, hand-drawn doesn't mean it's a shoo-in, so I'm probably going to back Punch-Out in terms of, I don't know, like Punch-Out has a really good presentation as a 3D game, with some kind of cell shading. So WarioWare and Punch-Out, they might be on even footing though, because WarioWare is a much more extensive aesthetic than Punch-Out. But ultimately, I'm going to say Punch-Out's a better game, because Punch-Out is a good game heightened by really exceptional moments, whereas WarioWare is an above average platform heightened to a good game by strong varieties. And moreover, Punch-Out feels like it escalates into its difficulty very well, whereas WarioWare's difficulty when it appears is contrary to the rest of the game, which is it's welcome, but It's not as tightly designed in that way. And moreover, WarioWare's additional difficulty, the manner in which they enforce that difficulty is through tedium as opposed to Punch-Out's, brutal defeat. WarioWare, reinforcing its difficulty with tedium makes what you're doing feel unimportant, whereas with Punch-Out, the fact that the negative outcome is so severe gives I would argue a bit of importance to beating those characters rather than it just being like trudging up a mud slope. It's more like wrestling a bear or a bear hugger, if you will. Yeah, Punch-Out overall, I think, even with WarioWare's added benefit of great music and a more comprehensive aesthetic, other additional touches such as the beautifully rendered level maps, I don't think you can really overcome Punch-Out. So, yeah, no, that's my ranking of Wii games as it stands is Punch-Out at number 1, WarioLand Shake It. I much prefer the European localization Shake Dimension, but WarioLand Shake It, and number 3, GoldenEye. For a second there, I thought I was going to give WarioLand Shake It an 8. I felt like I had gotten carried away in my own review, which I suppose is a good thing. Again, as I've stated, if you want to petition me to knock WarioWare up to 8 out of 10 or want to put it above Punch-Out, then you do have the power to sway me to do that. It was a little closer than I figured it would be, even though I found Punch-Out considerably more enjoyable. It's just how it turns out, And all that said, there's our list thus far. If you want to email me, you can at nalistenerq@gmail.com. And that will be the end of today's show. Again, the email address is nalistenerq@gmail.com. Have a well and worthy day.